So how are you doing, Stephen?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Oh man, I have had much better days. It is I think about every possible tech issue that one could have. I had it and kept you waiting with I know you were biting your nails off like, come on, what's this guy doing? Come on, come on. So
As long as you've had worse days, that's okay, I think.
yeah, oh, I absolutely have had worse days, that's for sure. So how do you pronounce your last name?
Nemesh.
Nemes. Okay. I knew there was something fancy to it. It looked too easy to it's funny because you look at mine, it's Crume, Crume, and everybody wants to go Crume, or Crum, or and I'm like, bro, just look at the name. That's all it is. It's nothing fancy. So, tell us a little bit about yourself. You're a Christian, obviously. How did you become a Christian?
Well, I was born into a family of Christians, and I've gone to church my whole life. Um, my parents are Pentecostals from Romania. They immigrated to America. My dad immigrated to America from Romania in the early 80s, my mom in 1989. They got married in 1989. I was born in 90. So I've lived in a Christian family my entire life. I attend a traditional Anglican church here in the Phoenix area where I live. I don't know that I would really identify myself with any particular Christian tradition. I'm just sort of I don't, Kevin Van Hooser talks about mere Protestantism. I am a mere Protestant, I guess. I don't agree necessarily with Van Hooser on a lot or even very many things, but I would call myself basically a content mere Protestant. I'm happy to be a Christian without being any kind of Christian in particular.
Oh, I'm with you right there. That's right up my alley. It's typically I lean pretty orthodox on a lot of things. And if there's something I want to know theologically, I'll usually go to some type of orthodox, commentary or something like that. So it's this whole North American Protestantism that it's become is something wild. I'm actually reading a book right now, and it's misinterpreting scripture, I believe it is, viewing it through Western eyes, and
Hmm.
it is just phenomenal at when we look at the cultures around the world about how um, collectivist they are. They're community oriented, and we're kind of the opposite. It's individualistic in the West.
Hmm.
So a lot of things we think are virtues, they're just blown away that it's a virtue for us, and but it is brought so much more into context, understanding, which is one of the things that I talk to people a lot about, scripture, especially a lot of evangelicals here is, you got to understand who Jesus was talking to. You got to know the culture. You got to know, uh, something, the genre of it, the context within history. And it's amazing when you do approach it that way, you really get the fullness, of the meaning of a lot of things that they say. Things come to light that you don't realize,
Hmm.
It's like some of the metaphors and, the parables and things of this nature, they're actually looking at geography, and so they use all of these symbolic things, and it just all really comes to light. So,
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the Bible certainly means more, and it becomes richer in meaning when you learn to see it from a different perspective than your own, and especially looking at it from the perspective of the persons who wrote it, or at least from that time period. It's very insightful and it's very illuminating. Absolutely.
yeah, absolutely. Just real quick, the book has just been so profound to me. I just wanted to add a little. So one of the guys, it's two guys that wrote the book. One of them had moved to Indonesia for like this long term missionary thing, and he had gone. His friend that he had met there had this store that had three or four different people there, and they all had little tasks that they had to do in the store, and he said, I could set this up where you could have one person do all the jobs, that these three or four people are doing. And the guy just looked at him with this horrid look. And he's like, what, did I say something wrong? Or he said, well, then they won't have a job.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
that really hit me. We don't think about community as much as other cultures do, throughout time. And we're thinking of, streamlining things and, just getting on top of it. And so it's just, the book is phenomenal. So how did you get into philosophy?
My undergrad is in philosophy. So I studied philosophy at Arizona State University. I graduated in 2013. I suppose I first got interested in philosophy when I was younger. I was about 16 years old. That year, I made a New Year's resolution I just got into movies and watching movies the year before. And I had made a New Year's resolution to watch more foreign films. So I wanted to develop my taste in movies. I wanted to start watching more foreign films. And as I was watching foreign films and I was reading about them and reading commentaries on the films and so on, I noticed that these films address philosophical issues, and they're more philosophical in nature. They're presenting a worldview. They're commenting on philosophical problems and questions of life. And a friend of mine who was leading a Bible study that I was attending at the time at church, he said, well, why don't you read this book? It was a book by Francis Schaeffer called The God Who's There. And he said, why don't you read this book? Because, he talks about philosophy and its relation to theology. And he talks about a lot of the things in art and cinema and so on, philosophical perspectives that you might encounter. So I did. And once I started reading it, I was hooked. I was just extremely interested in philosophy from that moment on. Now, I certainly have gone beyond Francis Schaeffer in a lot of ways. But that was where I got started. That was, probably in 2006 or 2005. So if anybody ever tells you that a New Year's resolution, won't accomplish much, it changed my life. That's for sure. Yet that New Year's resolution to watch more foreign films basically set me on the path to becoming who I am today. So I'm interested in philosophy basically because of a decision a long time ago to start watching more foreign films. And so I graduated high school, and I knew right away as soon as I graduated high school that I wanted to study philosophy. I had started studying philosophy even while I was in high school. So I did. I went to Arizona State University. I majored in philosophy and I minored in religious studies. I graduated in 2013. I really had a good time. I enjoyed all of my classes. I studied all sorts of things. And it was a lot of fun. I got along well enough with my professors. I'm sure, in all of my classes, I was that one kid who was really eager and always wanted to talk. So I'm sure my professors might have found me annoying at times, and maybe some of the other students as well. But in any case, I enjoyed it. And I still like studying philosophy. My PhD, so I'm going to be submitting my dissertation next Wednesday. So I'm about this close to finishing my PhD. My PhD is in theology officially, although my dissertation is basically a philosophical theology. So I'm kind of combining both worlds. But I've always had an interest in philosophy. I've always read philosophy, alongside theology. So this is one of my life's passions for sure.
Absolutely. That's awesome, man. So where are you doing the PhD at?
Fuller Theological Seminary.
Okay. That's cool. Yeah. I wasn't in the cards for me when I was younger, but I'm actually going to work towards getting something here now that I'm halfway dead. So maybe one day, I'll be up there and it'll say PhD, but we'll see.
Well, you shouldn't think of it that way. You're not halfway dead. Maybe now you're just getting ripe.
That's exactly right. That's, the what is it? The darker the berry, the sweeter the juice. You get it riper, and next thing you know, it's just the best taste it's ever had.
That's you. That's where you are now.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So my first exposure to you was, I'd seen you around and we're in the same groups and read some of your stuff, but the real was because I particularly are probably one of the few people that enjoy the ontological argument and any type of ontological argument. So I'd seen you and Ben, I believe it was Ben Watkins, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I thought. And I was pretty intrigued with the argument. And you have, so this paper that you had sent over to me, is this one that's being submitted for a journal or?
Yeah, it's out there in the world. It's hopefully it's out there. I submitted it to a journal, and I'm hoping to get it published. So hopefully, whoever it is that we sent the paper to review it doesn't watch this video, because then they'd have to send it elsewhere. It's got to be a blind review. So hopefully, no.
Yeah,
But apart, yeah, it's out there in the world, and I'm hoping to get it published.
absolutely. So usually I do a beer of the week, and I was cheap this week and went with one of my favorites, which is just Michelob Ultra. That's it. It's nothing fancy. I'm not a big connoisseur. I know a lot of people are, but it seems to me expensive beer is it's like cheese and wine. The more it costs, the worse it tastes. So it's just, you can't beat a good old glass of cheap wine and a big old block of cheap cheese. It doesn't get any better than that. So
I can sympathize with the sentiment.
So what inspired you to write on this on the topic of your paper that you were submitting?
Yeah, well, I guess I should give a brief overview of what it is that I'm talking about in the paper. So the paper is called Michel Henry, Dumitru Staniloae, and the World as God's Body. So the question that I'm addressing in this paper is as follows. On the one hand, Christianity says that God can be encountered both sort of inwardly in the domain of subjectivity and then outwardly in the world. But no matter which way you take it, there are problems, which seem to undermine the confidence with which Christianity talks about these things. So, for example, if you say that God can be encountered in the domain of interiority and in our inner domain, the subjective domain, you might think that that turns God into a feeling, that can come and go. And, sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. And then you're left wondering whether it really was God that you felt or just something else. On the other hand, certainly God is not one of these visible things that we can see in the world. So if we're going to encounter God in the world, it has to be a sort of a mediated encounter, perhaps by means of some kind of argument. And then our encounter with God is only going to be as good as our argument. And you and I both know that the arguments for the existence of God, you might find them convincing, but other people don't. And no matter what argument you put forth, there's always going to be some possible response to the argument. And there are going to be some philosophical presuppositions of the argument that will be contestable. Somebody from a different perspective will come and say, well, I don't agree with this. So the question that I'm asking is, how is it that Christianity can speak so confidently about God and the possibility of encountering God inside and outside, so to speak, in the light of these problems? So basically, what the question that I'm answering in this paper, or the question that I'm asking rather in this paper, is how to understand what Christianity is saying. What does Christianity mean by God when it says that we can encounter God sort of on the inside and on the outside as well? And I answer this question by synthesizing the thoughts of two thinkers who you might think otherwise have no connection with one another. One of them is the French philosopher Michel Henry. He's a philosopher in the phenomenological tradition that I've been reading a lot of lately and that I really like. And another one is a theologian, a Romanian Orthodox theologian named Dumitru Staniloae, and he is one of my favorite theologians. He's certainly exercised a tremendous influence on me. And they both provide ways of understanding. So Michel Henry provides a way of understanding how we encounter God in the inner realm of subjectivity. Dumitru Staniloae provides a way of understanding how we encounter God in the outer realm, sort of in the world that we experience. And what I do in my paper is I try to synthesize these ideas. I try to show how to understand, what Christianity is saying in such a way that we can be experiencing God even in this very immediate and uncontroversial way, both on the inside and on the outside. So that's the basic problem of my paper.
Absolutely. That's I gave it a skim. I tried to get it read, and of course, with all the tech issues starting up, I didn't get to finish it out. So, but I'm definitely going to finish it. It's pretty interesting to me because that's actually one of the I guess kind of gray areas for me is the inner experience. What exactly it is. How do we put it in a sense that, we're not just talking about some type of feeling or, something of that nature. And also, like with natural revelation, God out in the world. So I lean towards I tend to say usually that I'm a type of evidentialist, And usually I'll tell people, that God isn't a feeling. And the reason that I do is because I think that the North American evangelical church has the wrong idea of what the feeling of God is. Like we're supposed to have this inner, almost like burning in the bosom that the Mormons would have. We're supposed to have these experiences and things. And there's lots of people, including me, I've had very few, experiences of God. Now, I will say, when I was first converted, I thought that I had, just the feeling of the Holy Spirit inside and things of that nature for a long time, but when that was gone, it was like, what did I do? Where did it go?
Yeah.
So trying to understand what the proper understanding of being indwelt and having the experience of God. And I usually liken it to, things like just having, I have, coming just from an evidentialist point of view, I have an extraordinary confidence in, Christ and it being the Son of God and being God. You wouldn't think that the evidence would be, at the level that the confidence is I have. So all I can attribute that to is, possibly a conviction, by the Holy Spirit or being assured, So is that the kind of where you're going with the paper, is how to trying to put it into perspective what that inner experience is?
There is some overlap between what I'm doing in my paper and what you're saying, but at the same time, there's a certain crucial difference. For Michel Henry, for example, he thinks that on the inside, this inner, realm of subjectivity and feeling, he thinks that that's where we encounter God. However, he would be quick to say that God is not any one particular feeling that we have. So, you mentioned people who maybe have a conversion experience and then they have this feeling of the fullness of the Holy Spirit and it goes away and then they wonder what has happened. Michel Henry will say, God is not that feeling that you have for a while and that goes away. What Michel Henry would say is that God actually is that life that you feel, that you find yourself having at every moment, that you didn't choose, right? Did you choose to be alive right now? Did you, right. Were you in a previous state and then you chose to come into life? No, I have done nothing to be alive right now. I simply am alive. It's a given. At the same time, there's nothing that I can do, even for a second, so as to, assure myself that my life continues. Because anything I do, I have to already be alive to do it. So I'll ask my students, what can you do to secure that you will be alive for one more minute? And they might say something, well, I can eat, or I can drink water, or I can breathe. And I'll say, but you already have to be alive to do all those things, right? Life is the precondition of all that. Life is what you already have to have in order to breathe, in order to eat, in order to drink water, in order to walk around or move or whatever. So this life that we feel inside of us, this life that is not something visible, right? My life is not the fact that my fingers move. You can cut my fingers off, I'll still be alive. Right. Michel Henry says life is what he calls self-affection. It's feeling or experiencing yourself immediately. Something that is alive for Michel Henry is something that experiences itself. And we also experience ourselves. We're alive, right? I can feel bored. I can feel tired. I can feel excited. I can feel happy. I can feel depressed. All these feelings that I have, these are just different modes of life, you might call them. They're different ways that I can experience myself as being. Now, this life that I have, which is the precondition of everything that I feel, which is the precondition of everything I do, this life that I find simply given to me, over which I have no control, which I cannot secure, going into the future, and which I didn't ask for, that life on which I depend, that is God, for Michel Henry. So for Michel Henry, it's not difficult at all to know whether God exists, and it's not hard at all to prove that God exists, because it's enough simply to turn inward, so to speak, and to feel your life, this life that you have, that you didn't ask for, and that you can't do anything to guarantee that you'll continue to have it. This life, which is continually making you alive, that is God. So for Michel Henry, we are always experiencing God. We don't always notice it because we look outside of ourselves most of the time. We're concerned with things outside, and we don't stop and simply reflect on the mere fact that we're alive and this reality of our own life. But for Michel Henry, it's not at all difficult to know that God exists. It's enough simply to pull back and to disengage from whatever it is you're doing, and simply to feel your life, to feel yourself as alive. That life that you feel, that's God. That life that you depend on, that you didn't ask for, that you can't secure for yourself, that you can't ensure that you're going to continue having it. That life, which makes you possible, and yet which is not depend on you in any way, that is God. So
he focuses more on the phenomenology of it then.
Yes, correct. Correct.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's so contrast with the other position that you were
with Dumitru Staniloae.
Yeah.
Sure. So for Dumitru Staniloae, God is found like this. One of the things that Staniloae focuses on so much in his work is the fact that the world is intelligible. It's rational. It makes sense to us. He says that the fact that the world makes sense to us is obviously necessary for our lives, right? We need to know what the world is so that we can use the materials and the things that are in the world for our purposes. For example, we use wood to build houses and not other things because we know what wood is. Wood has a certain nature, it has certain properties. We can learn what those properties are, and then we can make use of it in order to build homes for ourselves. We eat certain kinds of animals and not others because some of them are nutritious for us, some of them will be poisonous. We eat certain kinds of plants and not others because we know what they are. We know that it will be beneficial for the human body, it will be harmful for the human body, whatever it might be. So for Dumitru Staniloae, the world makes sense for us. It's intelligible. You can know it. It's structured in such a way that it conforms to our capacity for knowledge. That's one of the things that he'll say. And he says this: the fact that it's rational and that it's intelligible, says Dumitru Staniloae, shows that it is the product, it's the creative product of a transcendent intelligence. So from the intelligibility of the world, he infers that there's an intelligent cause of the world. If the cause of the world were not intelligent, then there'd be no explaining how it is that the world can make sense to us. The reason why the world makes sense to us is because it comes from a mind, right? A mind that appreciates the intelligibility of things, that can grasp it, and that can also create intelligible things so that we can use, other minds can use it. And he goes beyond this. He says, on the one hand, the world is intelligible because it's created by a mind. On the other hand, the world is intelligible so that we can know it and we can use it, right? So it serves the purposes of our life. And so he says, well, we can understand that the world, sort of this middle term, is the medium through which a dialogue takes place between the creator and ourselves. So the world that we know and that we can know and make sense of and make use of for our purposes is kind of like the medium through which a dialogue takes place between God and the human being. The world is intelligible. God is the intelligent cause of the world, and we make use of the world, that we receive as a gift from God, so to speak, by making use of the materials that are in it and so on. And he goes further on and he says, okay, so God is the cause of the world. He is the cause of everything that happens in the world and so on. Not only is, the human use of the world in general a matter of maintaining a dialogue with God, but he says also the individual things that happen in my life are also a way of having a dialogue with God. And I find that what he says here really resonates with people who are Christians. So he'll give this example. He says, I work with people and my colleagues ask me all kinds of difficult questions. Some of them might believe in God, some of them might not. And he says, through these experiences where my colleagues are asking me questions, I undertake a dialogue with God because I choose, how am I going to respond to these people's problems? And am I going to love them? And am I going to seek their, spiritual betterment by helping them with their problems? Am I going to ignore them? And am I only going to make use of them for my own enjoyment? Or am I going to treat them as ends in themselves, so to speak? So for Dumitru Staniloae, the world is an intelligible reality. It makes sense to us. And that's because it comes from a mind, which at bottom resembles our mind in certain ways. Obviously, God doesn't have a brain and so on. But, it comes from a mind. And that's why it makes sense to our minds. And because it comes from a mind, he thinks of it as kind of like an address or a letter. Just like I might send you a letter and you can understand what I mean, by reading what I've written. So also the world is kind of like a letter that God sends to the human beings, and he awaits a response. And not only the world in general, but even particular events that take place within the world. Those also, are sustained by God, because the whole world only exists because God sustains it. And so God, in sustaining the universe and in providing me by his providence an opportunity to meet with some person, he is sort of presenting me with a challenge, you might think, right? Here, what are you going to do with this? And then I respond to that, either by responding in love or by responding, in a selfish way. So for Dumitru Staniloae, the world is intelligible, it's caused by God, but most importantly, it's sort of the medium in which a dialogue, a back and forth takes place between the human being and God. So that's really the significance of the world for Dumitru Staniloae.
That is, I love that take. I mean, I really, that's it, because to me, it runs the same as, I mean, not the same, but what it reminded me of is it's like a deeper explanation of, I believe it was Aquinas who talked about, reality is God's reality is God, and we just participate in his reality. So, I mean, it just seems to that given that, that when you really think about it, the foundation that all of God is all of reality, and we participate in his reality. And then we look at the languages of the world through mathematics and logic and things kind of like the workings of God's mind. And then we, as he puts it, like you were talking about, that's also not only the canvas, but the way that we are communicating, with God. And it really just all seems to come together like this big, huge picture.
Mm-hmm.
Is he kind of a classical theist, or any influence from maybe Aquinas, or
So Staniloae is an Orthodox theologian. He would not really be influenced by Aquinas mostly. His influences are typically like Maximus the Confessor, Gregory Palamas, and other figures like that from the Eastern Christian tradition. However, some of what he says is certainly consonant with what Aquinas says, and that's because at the end of the day, they're both Christians, right? There is, beyond the differences of every individual church, there's like sort of a fundamentally Christian way of thinking about things. And I think that, that's what explains why you'll find areas of resemblance between Staniloae and Aquinas, or, other figures. He's not a classical theist, I wouldn't say. He talks everywhere about God being a person with a will, and he has feelings. He has this wonderful discussion of the doctrine of hell in one of his. He has this in English. It's 6 volumes, but in Romanian it's 3 volumes. An Orthodox dogmatic theology, which is basically his systematic theology. And in his treatment of hell, he talks about how God allows people to reject him definitively. And he just sort of suffers the sadness that's involved with that. So God's purposes are frustrated. He's not happy that people go to hell. But he, in an act of kenosis, in an act of sort of self-emptying, he simply assumes the sadness involved in keeping those people around, even though they reject him, because he loves them and he wants them to exist. So Dumitru Staniloae is not a classical theist. He won't really talk in a lot of the same terms as classical theists, but at least on this point, the connection between the intelligible world and its intelligent cause, there certainly is a certain consonance between them. Absolutely.
And I think, to me, honestly, I think that's one of the largest hurdles for naturalism is, not just consciousness, but intelligence. It's hard to see how, random processes, we can take all the elements of the brain and put it all together any way that we want, and we'll never get a consciousness from it. So it's obviously not reducible to the brain as far as we know, because you can put it all together and you're still not going to get consciousness. But even further than that is intelligence. It's how could you ever explain, even if it was an emergent property, to have the intelligence that creatures have? That's one of in my opinion, one of the largest hurdles for naturalism is trying to explain that. So yeah, that's putting it. I mean, putting it all together. I like the view a lot. I really do. It's I'm anxious to dig into the paper and really get into it because putting those two views together, it seems pretty interesting. How much time did it take you to do that?
The paper, well, sometimes I'll work on a paper for a long time and nothing will come of it. And sometimes I just have an idea and it hits me and I can finish a paper in a couple of days. I think I finished this paper in maybe 3-4 days.
Oh, wow.
So I had the idea, I wrote it down, and then I sent it off. So sometimes inspiration strikes, and I try to make the most of the moment, and sometimes I languish for a long time without any new ideas, without any new projects, and I just concentrate on other things.
I guess if you got a pretty good understanding of both of their theologies, that philosophy.
Yeah, I wasn't starting from scratch. That's right. Yeah, I had a prior knowledge of the materials.
So, what in the end? I mean, I know you were wanting to try to put those two together. Is there a certain particular aim at putting them together, or was it just to make a more robust picture, or was there, another point that you were trying to get to when you did it?
The reason why I want to put them together is because I think that although their individual pictures are very attractive and I think compelling in a lot of ways, there are also certain gaps. There are certain things about their pictures that don't exactly work. And so I thought that I could help fill the gaps by combining them in a creative way. And so here's how that works. So, one thing to know about Michel Henry, for example, Michel Henry, he's a phenomenologist. He is, his approach to philosophy is to pay close attention to experience. And he says basically that there are two kinds of experience. There's an experience of, what you might call intentional experience, where you're sort of directed at an object. And then there's, affective experience or non-intentional experience, where you're not directed at an object outside of yourself at all. You simply experience yourself. So, for example, sadness, phenomenologically speaking, sadness or excitement or happiness or whatever, you are not pointed at anything. You are simply feeling yourself to be a certain way. It's just a form of self-experience. And life itself, according to Michel Henry, is a form of self-experience. He does not believe that life is this biological phenomenon, right? And this is actually a great point to lead into the deeper discussion. For Michel Henry, life is not a biological phenomenon. It's not that you get a bunch of atoms or molecules or whatever, and you get them moving in the right way, and then a living thing emerges. He says, no, life is experiencing yourself. It's this sort of non-intentional sort of self-experience, auto-affection or whatever he calls it. And that stuff, atoms moving, that's just an appearance. That's just what it looks like on the outside. The real thing, the reality of life, is this inner subjective experience of yourself. That's what life is. All this other stuff, the body moving, a person moving around and seeking water and eating food and so on, that's just a visible appearance. That's just like the outside of it. That's just what it looks like from the outside. The reality of it is on the inside, this thing where you just experience yourself. So for Michel Henry, the world, everything that we're experiencing on the outside, everything that we experience as something distinct from ourselves out there, whether it's this computer, or if I think about the number 2, for example, the number 2 is not me. When I think about the number 2, I'm not thinking about myself. I'm thinking about something that's outside of myself. So when Michel Henry uses the word world, he is talking about this big outside, this, big domain or stage, whatever you want to call it, environment, where things that are different from us appear. So in the world, you have the physical cosmos, you have this world that appears to our sense experience, but you also have, sort of abstract or ideal realities like numbers, mathematics, logic, and so on. These are also in the world because they appear to us outside of ourselves. That's what the world means for Michel Henry. It's this milieu of appearance, so to speak. It's just whatever is outside that shows up to your consciousness. Life is this inner domain of self-experience. In life, you are not experiencing something outside of yourself. You're experiencing yourself. So when I'm happy or when I'm joyful or when I'm bored or whatever, I am not experiencing something outside. I'm simply experiencing myself. That's why I say I am bored and not, this is bored or that is bored. I am bored. One of the problems that people bring up with Michel Henry is that he interprets all of Christianity as referring back to this inner domain. So for him, everything that Christianity has to say is about this inner domain. And I'll give you an example. Christ says, and this is an important passage for Michel Henry, Christ says, don't call any man your father because you have one father, right? God who is in heaven. He says, when Christ says that we have one father, he is referring to what I was talking about earlier, right? I'm alive, but I feel that I depend on this life that I have that I don't control. Okay, that life is God, and I depend on it. That's what Christ means when he says that I am the Son of God. He means that I am this finite, dependent life that feels itself to be alive in the life of God, so to speak. So for Michel Henry, what Christ says, you are the sons of God, that's something that we can look inside and confirm and see that what Christ is saying is true. So, that's one occasion. But a lot of theologians think that, what Michel Henry, it's basically like it's too inward. He doesn't say enough about the theological importance of the world. He doesn't say enough about the theological importance of creation. So this is one repeated, complaint that people have about him. He wants us all to turn inward and simply to experience ourselves and to discover God on the inside, but he doesn't say enough about the outside. So Michel Henry is missing, a sort of a theological significance for the outside, as I was calling it earlier.
Yeah, it seems like some type of phenomenological or theological solipsism. It's
not a solipsism because he says you are experiencing God. You're experiencing something that
right.
is you're depending on. But so it's not quite a solipsism, but it certainly is sort of inward. It's it's turned inward.
Yeah, there's which I can see that. That's when it comes down to it. That's the whole problem with fields like psychology and things of that nature, because it's a subjective experience. We all know what pain is, but I don't know what pain is for you, and you don't know what pain is for me. So it's kind of, I can see, why he, kind of goes that way, because it really seems to be, kind of how life is. That's just not going into solipsism, but really all we can guarantee is what we experience.
Yeah.
So
well, interestingly, Michel Henry agrees with what you say. So for example, I see you, right? And you look like you're in pain, but I don't see your pain, because your pain is not simply the contortion of your face or whatever, right? The pain is what you feel. And obviously you are feeling it and not me. What appears in the outside is just an appearance. It's just the way it looks from the outside. It's not the reality. So, he will also point to what Christ says when he criticizes the Pharisees for fasting and for praying and for doing all these things, but on the inside, they're whitewashed tombs. He points to that and he'll say, look, Christ teaches us that the reality of the human person is the inside. The outside stuff, that's just a semblance. It's just an appearance. It's just the way you look to other people. The reality is on the interior. So he emphasizes the interior because he thinks that that's what Christ's teaching, suggests. The real human person is not this thing that you see. This is just an appearance. This is just an external aspect. The reality is on the inside, and you don't have access to that. But at the same time, people complain about Michel Henry because he seems to, I don't know that he actually does this. Personally, I'm not convinced, but they say that he denigrates the creation. He denigrates the world. He doesn't ascribe to it enough significance. Right. So that's the good. So the good thing about Michel Henry is that he provides us a way for understanding how we experience God on the inside. God is that life that we feel, right? The bad thing is he's missing a theologically significant appreciation of the world, the outside. Interestingly enough, the opposite problems are there for Stanislaus. So he does have a theologically robust understanding of the world, right? The world is where the dialogue takes place between us and God. God brings this world into existence. He puts us in it and then interacts with us sort of through the things of the world. However, the problem is that personally, we don't have to get into the details here, but I don't think that Stanislaus' argument, the world is intelligible, therefore it has an intelligent cause. I don't think that his argument really is as strong. I think that it's missing something. There's something missing in the argument.
Right.
So I won't have to get into the details here because I want to move on to my concrete proposal. But that's what I would say. So Staniloae has an appreciation of the world, but his argument to show that the world is connected to God is kind of weak. On the other hand, Michel Henry has a way of appreciating how we can experience God on the inside very clearly and directly, but he doesn't say enough about what the world is. He doesn't have enough significance for the world. So this is where my proposal comes in. And here I try to create an analogy. I said earlier that I am this invisible life, this invisible subjectivity that you do not see. But however, I do have an external aspect, right? My body. And through my body, I can communicate to you through what I say, through the use of my hands, through my facial, expressions and so on. So my interior life is invisible and hidden, but I do have this visible aspect through which I can communicate with you and you with me. Now notice, I am a finite living thing. I depend on God, right? So God for Michel Henry is like the absolute life, and I am just this finite living thing. And I can sense God as that life that I depend on, but I'm just a finite life. He is this absolute life that I have no control over. Well, what I say in my paper is that just as I am a finite living thing with a finite body, but I depend on God, who is this absolute life, the world itself, not the earth only, not the physical cosmos only, but this whole outside, everything, the abstract, the concrete, all of this that appears outside of me, that is distinct from me, is the visible outside, the visible and external aspect of God. It's the body of God in this sense. So just as my body is the visible aspect of my invisible interior life, so also this whole, milieu of appearance, which I call the world in the phenomenological sense, that is the body of God. In other words, it's the visible external aspect of an invisible body, of an invisible life, right? And it's that invisible absolute life that I depend on. So just as, I can sense that I depend on life in myself, and so also this has an external aspect, right? Externally, I depend on the world. I need to eat, I need to drink, I need to, be in certain conditions. So this internal, finite dependence on the absolute is mirrored on the outside. My body and the visible dependence that I have on everything, that is sort of the outside, the visible external aspect of my inner dependence on God. And so that means that this world, which again, I don't mean the earth, I don't mean the physical universe, I mean this whole outside in which every possible experience takes place, that is the external visible aspect of God. It's sort of the corollary on the outside of this inner absolute life that I feel that I depend on. So that's what I mean when I say that the world is the body of God.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I mean, really it is. That's, when you just like you were saying, I mean, we obviously have dependence outside of ourselves on God. Sustaining reality. That's right up my alley, man, because I love, natural theology. I love, Aquinas's 5 ways. And, so I get the internal dependence. And I think a lot of people would probably relate easier with that, but it's the external dependence also. It's like you're saying, like in the paper, that I think it's pretty cool how you've kind of just woven them together, and it's like, hey, yeah, we're dependent.
Yeah.
So, but going back to what you were saying about Jesus and talking about the internal.
Mm-hmm.
I was on David Smalley's podcast this past Saturday, and that was one of the points that I brought up to him, and then I bring up a lot to people who seem to miss that almost everything that Christ talked about was the heart,
Mm-hmm.
the intent.
Yeah.
That was everything that he talked about. When they outwardly were trying to keep the law, he made it 10 times harder. And it's always the intention. And I think a lot of people really miss that part of it. Is it's the heart that matters. It's what you do when nobody's looking. It's what your motives are. It's that
Yes.
part that you can't see, you know. Um, like you were saying about him, is you can't see what they're doing. All you
Mhm.
know is what their outer motives are. Um, so that's, man, I'm gonna have to look into his theology also, because I kind of like that, you know.
So I would recommend that you read the book Words of Christ by Michel Henry. I read the book last year as I was doing research for my dissertation, because I talk about Henry in my dissertation. And it was life-changing. It was like, the penny dropped and something clicked for me, and I realized, oh, this is right. So Words of Christ by Michel Henry, you can find it on Amazon. I don't think it's very expensive. That's what I would recommend. And I recommend it to a lot of different people. He has some discussions that are more phenomenological in nature, so they may be a little harder to get through if you're not really familiar with phenomenology as a way of doing philosophy. But I don't think it should be too difficult. The book in general is I think very accessible, and I think it's a great sort of introduction into his work.
Yeah, I'm a little. I mean, obviously familiar with phenomenology, but I haven't done too much in the realm of phenomenology, which is the problem with philosophy in itself. Is there's 5 million different areas you can go to, and
Yeah, you can't be an expert on everything.
right, and being ADHD as I am, it's like, no, I want to learn about this. Oh, that sounds cool. I want to learn about that. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of like, yeah, trying to find out, you know, what I like the most, where I'm going to focus. And that's my, I think I've finally narrowed it down after about 10 years in philosophy of religion. Um, I really, really like, pro-life arguments.
Hmm.
Um, and I really like metaphysics,
Hmm.
ontology. I It kills me to this day that I still see very good philosophers who can't truly grasp the distinction between ontology, and it's conflated. It's conflated so many times. It's like, well, what does that tell me? What it tells you is epistemology.
Hmm.
We're talking about an explanatory hypothesis for the universal abstracts in the world, and things that it's an explanation for all the things that we can't answer through science. And so it's like I was telling you with the ontological argument. I actually like the ontological argument. I know it's not very convincing, but I think there's a lot more that goes into it than what a lot of people realize. The weight
I
that's
I tend to think that a lot of the arguments that are not very popular in philosophy, they're not popular because people have certain, implicit or inexplicit biases that just close them off to certain modes of reasoning. But if you consider the ontological argument, I think interpreted in various ways, it works. It's sound.
yeah,
And I also, I was just talking with another friend about Descartes' argument for the existence of God in the Meditations, right? After he proves the existence of the self, he offers an argument for the existence of God. I actually think his argument is not all that bad. A lot of people, sort of, they don't take it very seriously, or they think it's, oh, what a weak argument or whatever.
right.
I think actually, understood from within a certain perspective, it can be quite a strong argument. So I'm inclined to agree with you. I like the ontological argument, and like you saw, I have my own formulation of it, and
Yeah,
I think it's quite an interesting argument for sure.
yeah, definitely. And most of the people that the objections to the ontological argument really aren't even objections, because when it's it just seems that a lot of people just don't really understand modal logic, and what's entailed there. Oh, well, you're just defining God into existence, and no, it's not defining anything into existence. It's using the modal logic, and you're coming to it to a conclusion from it. It's not we're going God, therefore this, oh, and God, because then we're just using circular reasoning, begging the
Yeah.
question. So, yeah, it's fun to play with them, but the thing is, it's not really convincing. So, do you have anything else that you're working on?
I have basically in the last couple of months, I've written a few different papers, and I've sent them out into the world, in the hopes of getting them published. So I have kind of this new direction that my thought is taking, and I want to develop it. So I've sent out some papers into the world. I haven't yet had many opportunities to to discuss them online or anything like that. But I have some various projects. I would, if you don't mind, I would like to sort of state the significance of the point that I made about the world as God's body. So if just to sort of summarize the discussion, because I wanted to get to the conclusion. So the way that I tried, so the question that I was addressing at the beginning. Okay, Christianity says that God is found on the inside and on the outside. Right. And for Christianity, this is not a problem. Christianity speaks confidently about these things. So I'm trying to understand, okay, what does Christianity mean by God when it says that these, God can be experienced immediately, and that, it speaks so confidently about this. So the way that I try to do this is to understand basically, the world, the visible, everything that appears on the outside, the physical cosmos, the earth, but also numbers, mathematics, truths, and so on, everything that's outside of us, everything that's in the outside, as the sort of the external visible aspect of an inner reality, right? So just as I am this hidden life, this hidden invisible subjectivity that you cannot see. However, I do have a visible aspect, which is my body, which is how I communicate with you. So also this world, everything that appears is the external visible aspect of God. And God is that absolute invisible life that I sense, that I feel in myself, but that I didn't ask to receive, that I can't control, but that is there, and in virtue of which I exist. The whole world, this whole milieu of appearance, is the external visible aspect of God, that absolute life in whom I depend. So just like I'm, a body that moves around in the world and in time and so on, but all of that is just a visible external, reflection of something going on the inside, which is invisible. So also that whole world, that whole context in which I am in, not just the physical cosmos again, but everything that appears in this outside that we call the world, that's just the external visible aspect of God. So that means that every experience that I have, God is there. God is that life that makes it possible for me to experience, and God is also sort of the invisible life behind this world that I experience. So all of our experiences are an experience of God. God is always everywhere, caught up in all of our experiences. So that's how, this is my suggestion in the paper. This is how Christianity understands God, and this is how Christianity can say with confidence that God can be encountered both on the inside and on the outside. Because God is that life that we feel, that we depend on the inside. And the world is just the external, reflection of that. It's just the visible external aspect of that inner life on which we depend, and which we sense ourselves in to be in immediate contact with. So that's how I sort of synthesize the ideas. That's how I make sense of these things. So, if somebody asked me like, well, how do you know that God exists? It really isn't all that difficult, right? That life that you feel, that you depend on, that you did not choose to have, and that you cannot secure for even 1 second because it comes prior to you, that life is God. And the external aspect of that, just like your body is the external aspect of you as a living thing, the whole world, this whole milieu of appearance, that includes the physical cosmos, but also includes mathematics and truths and everything else that appears outside of us, that is just the external appearance of God on whom we depend. And so everybody is constantly in the presence of God. Everybody is constantly experiencing God. We just don't know where to look. We don't know how to find him. People ask, how do you know that God exists? Christianity, I think, is just saying you don't know where to look for God. You are so focused on particular things that you don't see the greater context in which everything is taking place. And that greater context is himself, God. Like Paul says to the philosophers at Athens, in him we live and move and have our being. That is exactly what I'm suggesting with this proposal.
And it's most certainly not pantheism.
No, I agree absolutely. It is not pantheism, because I'm not God.
I was just making that clear because somebody's going to come up and he's a pantheist.
No, so. I don't think that it is pantheism at all. Although I at the end of the day, I think the label doesn't matter. I don't know what you would call this view, but it doesn't matter what you call it. There's clearly a distinction between me, for example, and my eyeball, right? My eyeball is just a part of my external visible aspect, right? And that I make use of to look around. I am not my eyeball, right? I am something hidden that communicates through the eyeball. And the same thing with God and the world, I would say. So God is not obviously the world. The world is sort of God's external visible aspect that he makes use of to communicate with us.
I like the analogy that I heard once. I don't remember exactly who said it. And of course, you can't press it too hard or it's definitely heretical. It's God's dreaming, and sustain, and we're all sustained by God's dream. It's his thinking of our existence. So every part of our existence is within God's existence. And so, which makes, pretty perfect sense with, experiencing or having that communication with God through his experience and reality that we participate in, like I said earlier. I didn't mean to carry the conversation a different direction.
No, it's quite all right. I just wanted to make sure I got to that point.
Good to wrap it around. I thought I had a pretty good understanding of it already. So I just want to make sure, I just, wasn't doing my ADD thing and going off on a tangent somewhere. But no, it's very interesting, man. I have learned a ton. That is, this is definitely, both of them are people I want to do more reading on now because, here in, the Western US or in the Western hemisphere, with, the philosophers and theologians, we're all used to the normal mainstream, and we don't get the lesser known that are well known in other cultures and, other places. So I think every opportunity that we have to learn, which is ironic because the book I was telling you I was reading was one of the suggestions that he had was to absolutely learn or pick up books about other theologians and other cultures so we get that different perspective, because of the way that we view everything through our, Western eyes, that we try to put, what we value and much of the world doesn't value. We kind of press that on to everything that, we read. And we always tend to put a 21st century meaning to ancient text and, things of that nature when other cultures seem to be able to grasp, the message that was intended a lot better than what, because they still have a lot of the same values, that they had in the times of Christ. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And did you say you were from Romania?
That's right. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Were you born here or?
I was born in America. Yeah. So my parents are both from Romania and we spoke Romanian in the house and I speak fluent Romanian. And actually I just finished translating a book from English into Romanian and it's going to be published by a publisher in Romania. So I'm fluent in Romanian, but I was born here. I grew up here, so.
Awesome. So you guys, everybody hears it here. I've got an international superstar on my podcast. He's famous in Romania. Just don't go.
Well, now I'm going to be famous after showing up on your podcast.
Yeah. We'll see about that. So, oh man, is there anything else you wanted to cover?
No, I think that's it. I think I got the main ideas out there. I hope people found it interesting.
Absolutely, man. That was fantastic, man. I really appreciate you coming on, Steve, and spending the time to explain it to us. And I'm definitely going to, finish the paper. I find it very interesting. So, and look into definitely the words of Christ. I'm definitely look at that one too. So, I appreciate you being here, bud, and maybe have you back again with less difficulties and it won't be so late next time.
It would be my pleasure.
Thanks, bud. Have a good one.
You as well.